Jujutsu Kaisen chapter 252 just pulled another bait and switch moment on us. In the last chapter, we end off with Maki stabbing Sukuna from behind, doing major damage to him, and you're left thinking, okay, this guy has to be going down right now, right? Absolutely not, because Sukuna is playing on God mode. We open up the chapter with the events winding down from the outside perspective. Moments before Maki attacks Sukuna, we see Kusekabe standing there watching the battle, and he's giving Okotsu praise, saying that he did a really good job moving the location of the barrier, and we get our first real reveal that Okotsu's attention during that fight with Sukuna wasn't just to try and win, and it wasn't just to try and give Itadori the chance to release Fushigoro's soul, but also to buy time to lower Sukuna's guard so Maki could attack. Kusekabe makes it a point to say that they have to be careful now, so as to avoid blind spots being detected, because they're only going to get one shot at taking down Sukuna following their plan, which goes into effect the moment that Okotsu breaks his barrier, saying that until then, they can't barge into his domain expansion, which it makes sense. Sukuna, up until this point, has had battle after battle, and his attention is on Rika and Yuta and Yuji, so if more of them started coming through the barrier, Sukuna's guard would immediately go up, and that's why they're waiting for Maki to show up, and she does so shortly after all this is explained, and we see that the cursed tool that she used to stab Sukuna wasn't with her at that time, which means it was already inside of the barrier. It's then that it becomes clear exactly what their plan is, which is they were taking advantage of Maki being undetectable inside of the domain expansion by a person who senses cursed energy and just in general, but also because she's the only one in their group who is physically fast enough to bum rush Sukuna in the split second after Yuta breaks his domain expansion, which is exactly what happens here. Okotsu breaks his domain expansion and Maki blitzes Sukuna with the weapon in tow and slams it through him in the chest and the heart from behind before Yuta's body can even hit the ground, which gives a lot to look at given the distances which she was able to cover with insane speed right here. Like, we knew that Maki was fast, but this is pretty crazy. It's believable by Maki's standards, but it's still crazy nonetheless. During this time, Rika swoops in for the rescue to get Yuta, who has been critically injured by Sukuna, and Mei's younger brother teleports right in to take Yuta and likely taking him to Shoko so he can have his body healed up via reverse curse technique. Sukuna, being the smart guy that he is, after he puts some distance between himself and Maki, he's already figured out what it is they're trying to do, and he's breaking down their plan. And as this happens, the narrator explains to us how dire the situation that Sukuna is truly in. The reason why his wounds aren't healing as fast as they normally do is because the split soul katana does damage that cannot be healed by simple reverse curse technique. And due to the effects of the battle with Gojo, Sukuna isn't able to completely heal his wound from Maki's attack. It's at this point that Gege starts playing with your heart here, because he's laying it on super thick that Sukuna is being pushed to his limit, or rather that's what you're being led to believe, because there's a plot twist that's coming at the end of the chapter that Gege hides very well. That just shows you that while they're doing really well right now against Sukuna, Sukuna's just on a different level in terms of how he's operating. Meanwhile, Itadori's body begins to start reaching his limit because he's used reverse curse technique to take a few attacks that should have already killed him, and his body is beginning to break down and it's beginning to fail him. Just as Itadori begins to go into a panic attack, we see that Choso is actually still alive, and he's calming Yuji down, walking through the healing process all over again. And I'm so glad we got this update on Choso, because dude, the last time we saw him, Sukuna had just one-tapped this guy and continued to ignore him, and I was worried he might end up dying the lamest death in the history of Jujutsu Kaisen, because we hadn't seen him in forever, like it seems, and there wasn't really an update on Choso. So that was nice to see that, hey, Choso's still around and still has a role to play here. The story then shifts back over to Maki as she and Sukuna, they're in the battle. She has Sukuna on the run for a moment, and for a while we see that it appears that this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that Maki has, she's taking advantage of, because she has Sukuna dodging her attacks, trying not to get hit by her cursed tool, because Sukuna knows that this weapon, it means trouble for him. It's worth noting that this is the first time we've seen Maki versus Sukuna since their initial battle earlier on in the culling game, before Gojo was shown making his grand return, and Gege doesn't let us down with the fight that we're getting, and Maki fans are being given some source material that they can use to make some very bold claims that I necessarily wouldn't make, but it's information that is there to be argued. Somewhere all the power scalers and number crunchers are completely orgasming over some of the stuff being said about Maki in this chapter that we'll get to in a moment. Sukuna, as he's battling Maki, gets to a point where he uses his technique on her after Maki lands a few hits on him, and he compliments her on being ahead of the other sorcerers on the battlefield, which that much we know, just given that before this 1 month of additional training that everyone did, she was already being called the equal to Toji Zenin, and Toji was strong enough that he was the first person to push Gojo in a fight, which is no thing to downplay. And of all of Maki's feats that you saw in the Culling game prior to this chapter, you can basically use it to upscale Toji, which is wild given how long ago Toji was introduced into the series. But Sukuna says that this Maki is similar to the battle he had with Mahoraga, which that in itself is going to lead to some pretty heated debates in the community for a while now. Debates I might say are a little disingenuous because of some of the context that's in there. However, the reason why Sukuna says this is that just as Mahoraga was able to do some pretty crazy stuff in that battle with Sukuna that he had in the Shibuya Incident arc, and that battle with Gojo in this arc, Sukuna's basically saying right here that, like, hey, Maki's doing something similar to Mahoraga. Again, there's some context you can twist if you want to be disingenuous. I'm not going to do that in this review. I'll leave that to the Maki fans to do. Meanwhile, Maki is taking note of Sukuna's wound and cross-referencing the information that she got from Fushigoro regarding the events at the detention center back earlier in Jujutsu Kaisen, and Maki begins smelling blood and taunting Sukuna, asking if he can keep fighting. And when Sukuna basically pulls a Steve Rogers saying he can do this all day, the knee-jerk reaction is to go, he's got to be bluffing. And given how well that Maki's doing, you have to sit there and say, hey, she might actually have a chance to take him down. And it goes back to the narrator's statement from earlier. But sadly, this isn't a bluff, I fear, and we find out when we shift over to the Hakuri versus Arame battle that is continuing, that Maki is in for a even greater battle than she might have expected. Just when Hakuri is gloating, saying that he wasn't sure at first when they launched into this plan if they could take down the Hulk in this case being Sukuna, but now he's feeling absolutely comfortable believing that they're going to do the impossible and take down Sukuna. Arame basically says, hey, hold on a second. Did you really think a group of sorcerers such as yourself, who are weaker than Satoru Gojo, actually stood a chance against Sukuna? At this point, if you read the manga, if reading the manga came with a record scratch, then this would qualify as such a moment, because this is where we get the bombshell dropped on us. Sukuna's cursed energy, it wasn't dropping due to fatigue and all these back-to-back battles with Gojo and Kashimo, Higuruma, Itadori, Rika, Okotsu, and now Maki. His curse energy is dropping because his interest in his opponents is tied to his curse energy based on what we're being told. At no point throughout any of the battles was Sukuna even fighting in a way where he could ever go all out, which is a nightmarish flex on the part of Sukuna, because it's a backhanded way of saying that he wasn't pressed fighting any of these kids who were coming after him. He basically viewed them all as being light work, including Gojo, and that rise and fall of his curse energy is basically a reflection of his boredom. Gojo, for all intents and purposes, was that shiny new toy that a kid gets on Christmas, plays with a few times, then the kid breaks the toy. That makes you go back to Gojo's death, particularly the moment where he's in that airport, where Gojo tells us, the audience, that he basically didn't stand a chance against Sukuna and that his fists weren't strong enough to reach Sukuna. Even Gojo knew that there were levels to this battle. He might have come the closest to getting to that top level, even if he never pulled Sukuna's full power out of him. That explains the reaction that he got when he realized that he was dead, because even Gojo knew he came up short. Gege right now is seriously starting to give Sukuna the vibes of Namek Saga Frieza, if we're being honest here, which anytime you're getting compared to one of the most iconic villains in Shonen Jump history, you are doing something right. Just as Frieza kept breaking through each time the good guys looked like they were gaining the upper hand, Sukuna is managing to do something similar, which brings me to the question, how the hell are they going to bring this guy down if he hasn't even shown his full power yet? And you got to think the answer definitely lies with Fushigoro being separated.